So if you need 26, raise your hand and we're going to start 26 this morning. All right. Oh, y'all, I got plenty for two. Okay. Oh, you are good. You are good. 26. Anybody need a 26? You got, okay. Why not? How are you? Welcome home.
I'm fine, thank you.
Oh, we're glad you're here too. She's a mess. Let me ask you, is everybody signed up for the online church directory? Does everybody have your connection in there? If not, get in touch with Megan this week and let her kind of walk you through that. Go ahead and get some, because people are already using, I'm already using it. And it's good to be able to go and find. Once you get on, you can check your information that's there. If it needs to be updated, you can update. One of the beautiful things about this is that in the future, like if you get a family photo or a nice photo that you like and you want to upload it, you can upload it to the site. And so it's really going to be, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to replace the process that every time since I've been here, I think we've had 2 or 3 directories, and we get all excited about it, and then it takes 6 months to get it, and then time we get it, it's old and out of date. So we're going to try to do this so it will be. And so while I'm talking about it, I thought we were going to put it in the bulletin, but it didn't. So you'll need to look at your old directory. I want to ask you to maybe send a card to Margie Wilson. Margie lost her brother here a few weeks ago. And it's really been hard on them. And we've not seen she and Ken a lot since COVID. So she calls me the other day and just very, very emotional. And we talked about it and we prayed together. And I tried to encourage her. And I gave her some things that I thought she might be able to do, like read the Psalms. The Psalms are really encouraging. And then I talked a little bit about, being at the services, because that's always a positive thing, letting people encourage. But I thought maybe here an opportunity has arisen that we might. There's just a lot of things connected to the death of her brother that's really, really got her attention right now. It's made her very emotional. So the address should be in the existing church directories, and you ought to be able to pull those up. But so lesson 26. Anybody need a 26? I knew Patricia needed one because she didn't ask for it.
I know. You can stay here.
All right. Oh, sorry. I'm blind. I can't see.
Thank you.
You are quite welcome. I'm excited about this lesson. It's a great lesson. Avoiding dogs and hogs. Kind of catchy, isn't it? We're going to look at one verse this morning. It's amazing how you can put 2 pages of information together off of one verse. But I do that a lot. I was going to say I'm pretty good at it, but I do a lot. And hopefully this is full enough of good digestive information that will help you in the process. But Jesus kind of throws this this statement kind of in the middle of a greater conversation. And of course, I know that as he goes through the Sermon on the Mount, he transitions some as he goes, and he deals with a lot of different subjects. But, basically, in chapter 5, he's dealing with ways we can work on ourselves and our relationship with God. Chapter 6, how we can look at others and determine what kind of relationship God is wanting from us. And then the third chapter really is talking about how we as individuals interact with other people and how we are to deal with other people. So we'll just follow the outline, see how we go. Maybe we can get through it the next 30 minutes. We'll just see what happens. So Jesus, he never wasted words, always precise. His words, though, had hooks. They were memorable. And so for him to say, don't throw your pearls before the swine, or don't give dogs what is holy, those are meant to be things that grab the attention. Proverbs 25 verse 11 says, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. So having the ability to say just the right thing at the right time, and I think it's very, very interesting that he says it at the time that he says it. And we'll look at that in just a second. In this sermon, when he said what he said, so often if you were a Jewish leader, you were not going to like what he had to say anyway. You were going to be offended by it because he has a way of pointing you out. If you're guilty, he has a way of pointing you out. And he did that a lot in chapter 6 and certainly so in this passage of Scripture. But he told them in Matthew 7, 1-5, remove all this self-righteousness, this judging selfishly. And he didn't say it, but you can just throw in there because he's talking about that Pharisaical mentality of judging, when you got somebody you're going to fix that's got a little speck in their eye and you got this big, huge log sticking out of your own eye. And so God, he's dealing with this sense of not judging. And, of course, we spent a lot of time with that last week. But then in verse 6, we have an admonition toward judgment. He said, don't judge. And then in verse 6, what is verse 6 if it's not judging? Do not give dogs what is holy. How do you know whether a person is a dog or is a pig? And certainly that's where he's going with this. Some people are dogs and some are hogs. How do you determine without judging whether they are or not? So the question is this a contradiction in what Jesus said? He says, don't judge, that you be not judged. And then he says, don't give dogs what's holy. Well, wait a minute. What's the difference? What is the difference? What do you think is the difference? There's no difference. He says, judge not, you be not judged. And then he says, don't give to dogs what is holy. What is different about the judgment he's asking you to make? Well, we understand from our lesson last week that when we make judgments, we got to be prepared that the same measure of judgment we use is going to be the same measure of judgment that's used against us. He's not saying don't judge. He's saying just be prepared that when you do judge, then that same criteria of judgment is going to be the thing. So if you judge in a petty way, expect to judgment in a petty kind of way. If you judge frivolously, expect a frivolous kind of judgment. If you judge it in an unrespectful way, expect an unrespectful kind of judgment. John 7 and verse 22 says to judge righteous judgment. Jesus said in one verse, judge not that you be not judged. He says in John 7:22, judge. So, contradiction in Jesus, right? No. He says judge righteously. Judge according to what is right. So whatever your interpretation is of verse 6 here, do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn and attack you, that you're going to be judging according to righteousness. Their righteousness. His righteousness. We make judgments 1,000,000 times a day. How many judgments do you think it took for you to get to church this morning? I mean, we make judgments all the time. But when we're making judgments against other people, or in view of other people, he's not contradicting himself. He's actually encouraging them to use some wisdom. Use some wisdom. We cannot judge the motives, but we are not to be gullible either. Well, I can't judge. Doesn't matter what they do. Oh, I can't. Judge not. You're missing the point of Jesus, because Jesus is all about judgment. Jesus is all about looking at what is wrong and saying, okay, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And you shouldn't be doing that either. You keep doing what you're doing, your soul's going to be in danger. Those are the kinds of things that, and of course, you got to use wisdom in how you deal with people. We looked at Galatians 6 about people being handled in a meek way and being careful what we say, because we're going to be judged as well. Very, very important. Matthew 10, verse 16, he says, behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So he says, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. What is it about these animals? What is Jesus got? What's the deal with the animals? What is it about these animals? What does a serpent conjure up in your mind? How many times have you ever stumbled upon a snake? Do you generally find a snake when you just walk around a corner and you say, oh, look at that field out there. Oh, there's a snake over there, and a snake there, and a snake over there. You don't do that?
We did that yesterday.
Did you do that?
Yeah, we were walking down the road. There was a snake in the road.
Yeah, just get away. Reality. Sorry?
It was by Charlie's house.
You got, well,
Just saying.
just saying. It's by Charlie's house. Judge not that you be not judged, brother. Okay. Well, no, the sheep, don't send your sheep in the midst of wolves. Some people are wolves. Some people are serpents. God wants you to be as innocent as doves. Does that mean you got to be naive? I've never seen a naive dove. They don't do things that are just, they have a reason for everything they do. Now, I don't know what their reason is. I don't understand it. But birds do what birds do, because birds think to do what they do. Different situations demand wise reactions. In the limited commission, Matthew 10, verse 14, it says, if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake the dust from your feet when you leave that town or that house or that town. Shake the dust off your feet. So how do you know, if you're being sent to all the house of Israel, how do you know when and when not to shake the dust off your feet. First of all, what does shake the dust off your feet mean? It just basically says, put it behind you. Leave them to their own judgment. Leave them on to their own selves. You just need to move on. I wonder how many times they ever left town and John said to James, can you believe that woman, the way she treated me? Can you believe how that guy would not even let us come in his house? We were talking to him about Jesus. How many times have you ever been in a situation like that? You talk to somebody about Jesus and they go, what are you? Not even who are you, but what are you? You must be one of those Christians. Putting us down. A lot of people in the world just think what we're doing is dumb here. You ever heard somebody say, well, that Christianity you're doing, that's a crutch. That's not really standing up on your own 2 feet. We've all heard it. So he says, be innocent as doves. In other words, don't be the reason why somebody turns their back on Jesus. And in the same way, if anyone doesn't receive, back in there in verse 6, if don't give what is holy to dogs, obviously you got to go through some sort of determination of what the criteria of dogness is and what the criteria of swine is in order to make those kinds of judgments. The key with the gospel is using good judgment and finding receptive hearts. God's looking for receptive hearts. In the limited commission and the great commission, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He that believes and is baptized. He that is baptized is going to be the person who has the heart, hopefully. Of course, I'm not their judge. You hope when a person's baptized. I'd like to think every person I've ever baptized had the best intentions in the whole wide world. I've baptized every person I've ever baptized in hopes that they had the meaning intended behind the action. But I don't know. Now, I've seen some that I could tell later, really, it just didn't catch. And, Jesus talked about that in the parable of the soils in Matthew chapter 13. So people are going to react in different ways, like the seed falling on the thorny ground. They accept the gospel, but the cares of the world come and choke out, and they end up leaving. But God's looking for a few good people. He's looking for a few good-hearted people. Salvation's for everybody, but not everybody's going to have salvation. Many are just not going to be interested in what's offered. And so, don't forget what this sermon is about. What is this sermon about? It's about kingdom living. If you're going to be in the kingdom of Christ, here's how you're going to live. And part of it is you're going to become judges. You're going to have to make some judgments. So who are dogs and hogs? Well, number one, they're unclean. In 1 Kings 21:23, just an example. And of Jezebel, the Lord also said, the dogs shall eat Jezebel within the walls of Jezreel. I visited Jezreel while I was in Israel. Nothing but just an old broken down field now. Hardly no buildings at all. A lot of pottery, different things, there. You can tell somebody lived there at one time, but the Bible tells us here that Jezebel was so evil that God foretold that she was going to die, and when she did, the dogs were going to lick her blood, and don't even like to think about it. Dogs in Israel were not like my little Yorkie, Poppy. I could spend some time talking. I even got pictures of Poppy. She's our little lap dog. Just spends all day long and just loving up on us, sweet. That's not the way dogs were in Israel. Dogs were they were scavengers All they were looking for is the next meal, and people didn't generally think, oh, well, let's save some food for Rover. They didn't have a Rover. People didn't bring their dogs into the house and take care of them. And so for them, a dog was nothing more than a scavenging animal, like you would a buzzard. How many people you got pet buzzards in their house? You know, beware of the buzzards, he could have said this day and time. Leviticus 11, verse 7, and the pig, he says, because it's parts the hoof and is cloven-footed, but does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Historically, the Israelites, they didn't eat any pork at all. I feel sorry for them, but they didn't eat pork at all. I was in Israel 2.5 weeks. I had some of the finest food I've ever seen, much less ate. It was just beautiful, just so much good food. Couldn't find any pork amongst any of it. You're just not going to find that in Israel. Why? Because that verse right there. So to them, hogs were horrifying. And of course, most of them, if they'd ever been around hogs, they knew what hogs did. Well, hogs just kind of, they're not dressy kind of animals. I've never understood about pet pigs. Does anybody have a pet pig? I'll be careful how I tread here if somebody's got a pet pig. I've thought, man, I'd have to wash that thing 2 or 3 times a day. Because a pig smells like a what? It smells like a pig. So, you know. Anyway, so no Jew in their right mind is going to give leftover sacrificial food dedicated to priests. You don't give it to your dogs. You don't give it to your animals. It's sacred. And the same is true about giving pearls. Pearls? You wouldn't give your pearls. I mean, pearls are expensive. If you have real pearls, they're really expensive. They're precious. And you wouldn't give those to a pig. So, obviously, you're going to have to make some choices. Of course, Jesus here is not talking about dogs or hogs, but he's talking about people. Most of the world has no appreciation for God's holy message. No more appreciation for it than a dog has for holy things. My puppy is the sweetest little dog in the world. But when we left the house, she didn't say anything. Well, you know, can I go with you this morning to church? She's not really interested in spiritual things. Dogs aren't interested in spiritual things. And people in the world are not interested in spiritual things. Now, some are. And that's where it gets a little challenging, right? That's where it gets challenging. Who are the dogs and hogs? Well, they're people who refuse to obey the gospel. Even some who've shown interest in you've talked with and you've tried to share it with them. Jesus was in Matthew 4 in our introductory material. So what seems like 100 years ago, when we started this study, Jesus had started his ministry going about preaching repentance, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's coming. And then he starts this sermon about the kingdom and kingdom living. And so it's an exciting thing. If you can be in the kingdom, that's the greatest kingdom in the world. The English loved to tell the ancient stories. About who? King Arthur. What was it about King Arthur that was so appealing to them? It wasn't his knights of the Round Table. What was so appealing about King Arthur? He was fair. He cared for everybody. He wanted to lift everybody up. That's what people have been looking for forever. And there are a lot of people that are looking for it today, and they've got it in the gospel. They've got it in Jesus. And they just don't realize it. One of the most heartbreaking thing that Jenny and I have to deal with in our family is a lack of interest in spiritual things amongst some of her family. She's not interested in it. Thinks we're dumb because we are interested in it. And even though we have a wonderful relationship, we love each other, but it's just kind of one of those unsaid things. We just think we can't even talk about it. And it's just so disconcerting when you see that there are some people that just don't have any interest. So we can't push people who don't want to be pushed. I can live it in front of them. That's what I've tried to do in these 40 years we've been married. I've just tried to live the Christian life in front of them and not been judgmental, and I hadn't gone in their house and gone, oh, you did it. I just love them. That's what we do. They do what they do, and we do what we do. Some had hardened their hearts to the deceitfulness of sin. Some have done that. And when that happens, there's not much more you can say. Now, here's what Jesus is not saying. He's not saying we should quit telling people the gospel. Well, 99% of a chance they're going to have a hard heart, so I'm just not going to say anything. Is that what he's saying here? There's so many dogs out there, I don't know how you can tell the difference. No, he's not telling you that. That kind of throws you back in the category of judge not that you be not judged, right? He's not telling us to quit telling people. He's not telling us to quit letting our light shine in front of people. In fact, even though you might reach a point in your life where you have to shake the dust off your feet, so to speak, in directly trying to tell, that still doesn't mean you can't be kind and good and show your Christian light in front of your family and your friends and your neighbors and your co-workers and everybody. Parents especially have a God-given permission and duty to influence their children for good. I tell you what, I have had so many conversations with parents and grandparents who have told me that their children have said, I don't want you to mention another thing about Jesus or church. And generally my answer to that is, what they don't understand is God gave you the responsibility to say something. Now, how you say it, you use wisdom in how you say it. But you always have a responsibility to say it, one way or the other. So you may be saying it how you live it. You may be saying it how you say it. You may be picking your times and your moments when, if you'd go to church, things might get better. Or if you put God's first, or if you pray, or you do this, or you do that. I think parents have a lot more power than they think. And, of course, we continue to pray for them, and whether they do what we want them to do or not. And so in our thoughts, they aren't dogs, even though they might be treating the gospel like a dog would treat something precious, or a pig would treat pearls type thing. Indifference, couldn't care, get muddy, not show appreciation for it. What Jesus is saying is this: use wisdom in knowing when, capitalized W-H-E-N, knowing when to move on. Hosea 4 and verse 17, Ephraim is joined idols. he said. Leave them alone. You read Romans chapter 1 and you see where, from the beginning, people had all the reasons in the world to trust in God. When they quit trusting in God, 3 times in that verse, that passage, God just gave them over to their sinfulness. In other words, they chose, they didn't want to follow after God, so God didn't chase them down the, When the prodigal son wanted to leave home with his wealth, the father didn't chase him to the border. He didn't chase him to the pig pen. And we're not expected to do so as well. Our responsibility is using good judgment. Don't be naive and don't waste your time with those who have made it clear that they want nothing to do with the Lord. It's going to break your heart. It's going to break your heart. I remember one time I was about 14 years old, and we had done like a door knocking Saturday that morning. And so the teenagers were there at the church where I went, and so we had teenagers going one way, church leaders the other. I think we're having a gospel meeting or something the next day. So anyway, I come up on his house and I knock on the door. Knock on the door. They come to the door, and I told them, my little spiel type thing, and we're here, inviting people to come to church and studying if anybody wants to study the Bible. Well, come on in. So we went in, me and this, I forgot who it was with me, but we went in, and he said, sit down, sit down. They went and got something to drink, offered us a drink, so we're sitting there with a drink and everything, and we get into this conversation. And 5 minutes turns to 10 minutes, and 10 minutes into 45 minutes. We were there for an hour and a half. And I'm sitting there going, oh, Daddy, I wish you'd just come knock on the door. My dad was a preacher. So I said, Dad, I wish you'd come. And I'm praying, Lord, send my dad, Well, sure enough, about 45 minutes, an hour later, a knock comes at the door. And it's my dad. And he comes in for about 5 minutes, and we were out the door. And I was never so glad to see somebody, because the thing was, all they wanted to do is argue with me. Everything I said, they disagreed with. And anytime I showed them a verse, they had a different verse. Or they had, well, go look at this verse, or go look at that verse, or what about this verse over here, or what about that verse over there? There are some people that will study with you all day long. Somebody says, well, Scott, you ought to have more Bible studies. I could have more Bible studies. I can have a bunch of Bible studies. I can go to every church in this town and knock on the door, and those pastors of those churches would be happy for me to sit down with the Bible and talk with them. There's a lot of people who will study the Bible with you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're open to change, or that they're open to what it has to say, are open to want to be moved in a direction that God wants them to move into. And I think that's where he's saying here, use a little bit of judgment when it comes to who you're sharing it with. And please don't get me wrong. I am not saying to any parent, any grandparent, give up. Never give up. I don't think Jesus is saying give up. Always hold out for the hopes that somebody will do the right thing, especially your children or your grandchildren or your neighbors or your closest friends, that they will finally do the right thing. I've told you the story about the woman in the congregation where I was preaching over in West Tennessee, where she had been married to her husband for 50 years, and he had never one time gone to church with her. We were studying 1 Peter 3, where he talks about those Christians, women married to non-Christians, that you, by your example, will be the best way to win your mate to the Lord. She came into me and she said, I've been doing that for 50 years. She said, I'm not so sure it works. And I said, well, you got to keep trying. You keep living it before it. Within a year or two, We had that man's funeral. He never did come. But she never quit coming. Sometimes people just won't win. People just won't come. Never give up. And I don't think that's what Jesus is here saying that we need to do. So, the principle illustrated here. We got about 4 or 5 minutes. Matthew 10, 11, 14, that limited commission, he talks about there in verse 11, and whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy. Find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. How do you know who's worthy? How do you know who's worthy? Will they not determine their worthiness? I've been in some Bible studies where they just wanted to talk about Jesus, but they never were interested in really doing anything for themselves. We studied. I've been in some homes where I was in the middle of study one time with a guy, and we were talking particularly about Jesus' death on the cross and how that his death on the cross was for my sin and for his sin. He came back and he says, I wasn't even born then. When Jesus died on the cross, he died for the sins of the people that were putting him on the cross. I said, well, that's true, he was. But he also died for the sins of every sinner that ever has lived and every sinner who will live. And guess who that includes? It includes me, and it includes you. Jesus died because of your sin. That man was so mad, he got up and he said, get out of my house. And I'm looking at the person sitting next to me. We're studying, and I'm looking, and his wife is sitting there, and she's looking at him. And it's like, what do? You get up and you leave the house. So you got all kinds of circumstances that happen, in dealing with people. So there's a challenge in knowing who's worthy. I'm going to go ahead and stop here and not get into Paul until next week. So thank you for listening, and you can go ahead and be reading ahead. I really wish we had done chapter 27 today.